No, wait, before you do that. Oh, okay.
I am recording. So,
Yay!
Yay.
I'm going to do a sound check.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, it's perfect.
Fantastic. All right. So, what we do is start with chapter number, and most of these don't have titles, so you don't have to worry about a title, but we do say the chapter number before we start reading. Now, the question is Drew goes first. Who goes second?
I'll go second.
Yay. All right. So, first is Drew, Zeeley's second. Who's third and who's fourth?
After you, Tammy. You can go third.
Okay, so I'm third. Um,
Hmm.
okay, so I have to tell everybody this. Please keep up with your numbers. I'm horrible about it, and unfortunately, I will take your turn, but please just stop me. Bob most of the time will. Feel free to
Yes.
jump in there and say, Tammy, it's my turn. Stop reading.
I'm going after Bob, so
Yes.
I'm just gonna remember that.
Yeah, that's nice and easy.
Remember your numbers, okay?
All
So,
right.
okay, so Drew, you're first, Zeely second, I'm third, so I'm after Zeely,
I'm
and
clean
then
up.
four. Okay. Oh, make sure you keep your water on hand, by the way.
Your lipstick is cracking me up.
Yeah,
Oh
so
my
the lipstick is
gosh.
a crazy witch woman.
Hmm. Crazy witch woman. Very
All
well.
right. So if we are ready, or if you're ready, Drew, we will go.
Okay. All right. Chapter 1. As soon as he was born, Mr. and Mrs. Kinker knew that their baby was not like other people's children. For one thing, he was born with a full set of teeth and would lie in his pram for hours, chewing huge mutton bones to shreds or snapping at the noses of old ladies cool enough to kiss him. For another, though he screamed with temper when he changed his nappies, his eyes never actually filled with tears. Also, and perhaps this was the strangest of all, as soon as they brought him home from the hospital and lit a nice bright fire in the sitting room, the smoke from their chimney began to blow against the wind. For a while, the Kinkers were puzzled, but as Mr. Kinker said, there was a book about everything. You only know where to look, and one day he went to Todcaster.
Okay.
Doncaster Public Library and began to read. He read and read and read, and what he read most about was black magic and sorcery and how to tell from an early age whether someone is going to be a wizard or a witch. After which he went home and broke the news to Mrs. Kinker. It was a shock, of course. No one likes to think that their baby's going to grow up to be a wizard, and a black one at that. But the Cankers were sensible people. They arranged the baby's name from George to Ariman, after a famous and very wicked Persian sorcerer, painted a frieze of vampire bats and newts' tongues on his nursery wall, and decided that if he had to grow up to be a wizard, they would see to it that he was a good one. It wasn't easy. Todcaster, where they lived, was an ordinary town full of ordinary people. Though they encouraged little Ariman to practice as much as possible, it was embarrassing to have their bird bath full of gloomy and lopsided vultures and to have to explain to their neighbors why their apple tree had turned overnight into a blackened stump shaped like a dead man's head. Fortunately, wizards grow up quickly. By the time he was 15, Araman could take a bus to Todcaster Common and raise a whirlwind that had every pair of knickers on every washing line in the area flying.
Okay. Halfway to
Wait.
Jericho. And soon afterward, he decided to leave home and set up on his own. The search for a new house took many months. Araman didn't want a place that was sunny and cheerful or a place that was near town, and though he wanted somewhere ruined and desolate, he was fussy about the kind of ghost he had. Never having had a sister, Araman was a little shy with women, and he didn't fancy the idea of a wailing gray lady walking back and forth across his breakfast table while he ate his kippers, or a headless nun catching him in his bath. But at last, he found Darkington Hall. It was a gray, gloomy, sprawling building about 30 miles from Todcaster. To the west of the hall was a sinister forest. To the north were bleak and windswept moors. And okay.
The east, the gray, relentlessly pounding sea. What's more, the Darkington ghost was a gentleman, and the sort that Ariman thought he could get well on with. Sir Simon Montpelier, who, in the 16th century, had murdered all 7 of his wives, and now wandered about, groaning with guilt, moaning with misery, and striking his forehead with a plashing sound. And here Ariman lived for many years, blighting and smiting, blasting and withering, and doing everything he could to keep darkness and sorcery alive in the land. He filled his battlements with screech owls and his cellars with salamanders. He lined the avenue with scorched tree stumps, shaped like gallows, and he dug a well in his courtyard, from which brimstone and sulfur oozed horribly. He planted a yew tree maze so complicated and devilish that no one had a hope of coming out alive. And he made the fountains on the terrace run with blood. There was only one thing he couldn't do. He couldn't raise the ghost of Sir Simon Montpelier. He would have liked to do this. Sir Simon would have been company. But bringing ghosts back to life is the darkest and most difficult magic of all, and even Ariman couldn't manage it. The years passed. Though he seldom left the hall, Ariman's fame was spreading. People called him Ariman the Awful, loather of light and wizard of the north. Stories began to be told about him, how he could make the thunder come.
He was friends with Beelzebub himself, but Ariman just went on working. He had grown to be a tall and handsome man with dark, flashing eyes, a curved nose like the prow of a Viking ship, and a flourishing mustache. But despite his fine looks, he was not at all conceited. In the years that followed, Ariman set up a private zoo in which he kept all the nastiest animals he could find. Monkeys, bald faces, and blue behinds, camels with sneering lips and lumpy knees, wallabies with feet like railway sleepers that kicked everything in sight. He turned the billiard room into a laboratory in which fiendish things bubbled all day long, giving off appalling smells. He called in rain clouds from the sea to drip relentlessly onto the roof. And one day he woke feeling completely miserable. He knew he could get up and throw someone into his well. Or Lester said to the turtle, tired, weary. Lester was an ogre, a huge, slow-moving man with muscles like footballs. Like most ogres, he had only one eye in the middle of his forehead, but so as not to upset people, he wore a black eye patch above it to make.
Okay.
People think he had 2. Before he came to Ariman's servant, Lester had been a sword swallower in a fair, and he still liked to gulp down the odd saber or fencing foil. It soothed him. Now he looked anxiously at his master. "Do you, sir?" he said. "Yes, I do, in fact. I don't know if I can go on much longer. I thought I might go away somewhere, Lester. Take a little room in some pretty market town, perhaps, and write a book." The ogre was shocked. But what would happen to blackness and evil, sir?" Ariman frowned. I know. I have a duty. I see that. But how long am I supposed to go on like this? How long, Lester?" The frown deepened, and he waved his arms in desperation. "How long?" Lester wasn't the stupid kind of ogre who goes around saying fee fi fo fum all the time. Now he looked at his master and said, "Well, I wouldn't know, sir. Ogres can't tell the future, you know. Gypsies can, though. Why don't you go and have your fortune told? There was a gypsy where I worked, Esmeralda, they called her. Newer stuff she did. So the following week, Ariman and Lester drove into Toadcaster to find the fair. They found Esmeralda's caravan quite easily. You could tell it from the other gypsy caravans because the
Okay. People who came out of it looked as though they didn't know what had hit them. She tells the truth, explained Lester, sniffing happily at the remembered fairground smells. Fried onions from the hamburger stall, hot engine oil from the bumper cars. None of that garbage about dark strangers and journeys across the sea. Esmeralda was a frizzy-haired lady in a pink satin blouse. Ariman had left off his magician's cloak and changed into a gray pinstripe. But the look she gave him was very sharp indeed. For you, it'll be a fiver, she said. Sit down. She pocketed the money, took a swig from the bottle, labeled Gordon Gin, and began to stare into the crystal ball. She stared for a long time. Then she pushed the ball away and lit a cigarette. It's all right, she said. He's coming. Who? Said Ariman eagerly. Who's coming? The new block, said Ariman. The one that's going to take over. Damn you. Ariman looked bewildered. What new block? Esmeralda closed her eyes wearily. Do you want me to spell it out for you? She put on a posh voice and droned. Soon there cometh a great new wizard, whose power shall be mightier and darker ever than your own. When this great new wizard cometh, you, Ariman, okay?
Ariman the Awful will be able to lay down the burden of darkness and evil which you have carried for so long. She opened her eyes. Got it? She said nastily. Oh, yes, yes, said Ariman happily. I suppose you don't know when he cometh. No, snapped Esmeralda. I don't. Next customer, please. After his visit to Esmeralda, Ariman was a happy man. Just to fill in time, he planted a briar hedge whose thorns oozed blood, ran an oil tanker aground on the cliffs nearby, and invented a new spell for making people's hair fall out. But most of the time, he spent by the main gate, watching and waiting for the new wizard to come. It was cold work. Darkington Hall was as far north as you could get without bumping into Scotland. And when, after a week, Ariman found a chilblain on his left toe, he very sensibly decided to make a wizard watcher. For the wizard watcher's body, he used a sea lion shape, but larger and furrier, with a sloping and rather cuddly chest. The watcher had 4 feet and 1 tail, but it had 3 heads with keen-sighted and beautiful eyes set on short stalks. And every day at sunrise, this gentle and very useful monster would waddle down the avenue, past the blackened trees shaped like gallows, past the oozing
and the devilish maze, and sit in the gateway watching for the wizard. Way, day after day, month after month, year after year, the middle head looking north over the moors, the left head looking west across the forest, and the right head looking east towards the sea. Then on the 990th day of just sitting there, the wizard watcher lost heart and became gloomy and not from the north, said the middle head, as it had done every day for 989 days. Cometh not from the west either, said the left head, nor from the east or the west, and then nor from the east doesn't he cometh, said the right head. And our feet are freezing, our feet are blinking, dripping off, said the left head. Pause. Know what I think, said the middle head? I think the old man's been had. You mean there ain't nothing going to be no new wizard? Said the left head. The middle head nodded. This time the pause was a long one. Don't fancy telling him, said the right head at last.
Okay.
Someone's got to, said the middle head. So the monster turned and lumbered back to the hall where it found Ariman in his bedroom dressing for dinner. Well, he said eagerly, what's the news? The new wizard cometh not from the north, began the middle head patiently. Nor from the west he dothn't come, said the left head. And you can forget the east, said the right head, because the new wizard doesn't come from there neither. Then, speaking all together, the three heads bravely, we think you've been taken for a ride. Ariman stared at them aghast. You can't mean it. It is impossible. He turned to Lester, who was getting ready to trim his master's mustache. What do you think? The ogre rubbed his forehead under the eye patch and looked worried. I've never known Esmeralda to make a mistake, sir, but it's been a long... He was interrupted by a terrible shriek from Ariman, who was peering forward into the mirror and clutching his head. A white hair, yelled the magician. A white hair in my cursed pearl. Oh, shades of darkness and perdition. This is the end.
His shriek brought Mr. Ledbetter, his secretary, hurrying into the room. Mr. Ledbetter had been born with a small tail, which has made him think he was a demon. This was a silly thing to think because quite a lot of people had small tails. The Duke of Wellington had one and had to have a special hole made in his saddle when he rode to battle at Waterloo. But Mr. Ledbetter hadn't known about the Duke of Wellington and had wasted a lot of time trying to rob banks and so on until he realized that crime didn't suit him and he became Ariman's secretary instead. Are you all right, sir? He asked anxiously. You seem upset. Upset? I'm finished! Devastated! Don't you know what a white hair means? It means old age. It means death. It means the end of a wizardry and darkness and doom at Darkington. And where is the new wizard? Where? The monster sighed. He cometh not from the north, began the middle head wearily. He cometh not from the north, you don't, snapped the great man. That's exactly what I'm complaining about. What am I going to do? I can't wait forever. Mr. Ledbetter coughed. Have you ever, sir, considered marriage? There was a sudden flash of light from Ariman. Okay.
Nostrils, and from behind the paneling, Sir Simon gave a gurgling groan. Marriage? Me? Marry? If you were to marry, sir, it would ensure the succession, said Mr. Ledbetter calmly. What on earth are you talking about? Snapped Ariman, who was feeling thoroughly miserable and therefore cross. It means you could have a wizard baby, sir. Then he could take over from you. A son, you know, said Lester. Ariman was silent. A son. For a moment, he imagined the baby sitting in his pram, a dear little fellow, tearing a marrow bone to shreds. Then he flinched. Who would I marry? He muttered miserably. But of course he knew. All of them knew. There is only one kind of person a wizard can marry, and that is a witch. It wouldn't be so bad, maybe, said the left-hand head encouragingly. It wouldn't be so bad, yelled Ariman. Are you out of your mind? A great dark crone with warts and blisters in unmentionable places, from crashing about on her broom. You want me to sit opposite one of those every morning, eating my cornflakes? I believe witches have changed since, began Mr. Ledbetter.
Okay.
But Ariman wouldn't.
Yep. But Ariman wouldn't listen. Running along the corridors in her horrible nightgown, shrieking and flapping, getting egg on her whiskers, expecting her pussycat to sleep on the bed, no doubt. She might not. Every time I went to the kitchen for a snack, she'd be there, stirring things in her filthy pot, rubbishly frogs, tongues and newt's eyes and all that balderdash. Never a decent bit of steak in this place, I expect, once she came. But cleaning her foul yellow teeth in my basin, raged Ariman, getting more and more hysterical. Or worse still, not cleaning her foul yellow teeth in my wash basin. She could have her own bathroom, said the middlehead sensibly. But nothing could stop Ariman, who stormed and ranted for another 10 minutes. Then, turning suddenly very calm and pale, he said, "Very well. I see that it is my duty." "A wise decision, sir," said his secretary. "How shall I choose?" said Ariman. His voice was a mere thread. "I'll have to be a Toadcaster witch, I suppose. Otherwise, there's bound to be bad feelings. But how do we decide which witch?" "As to that, sir," said Mr. Ledbetter, "I have an idea."
Okay.
Chapter 2. The Witches of Toadcaster were preparing for a coven, and they were very much excited. Covens are to witches what the wolf clubs or the brownies are to people, a way of getting together and doing the things that interest them. And this one wasn't to be just an ordinary coven with feasting and dancing and wickedness. Rumors were going around that a most important announcement would be made. I wonder what it will be, said Mabel Rack. Some new members, perhaps. We could do with them. This was very true. Toadcaster now had only 7 proper witches. If Ariman had known what a state witchcraft had got to in the town of his birth, he'd have been even more miserable than he was. But fortunately, he didn't. By day, Mrs. Wack kept a wet fish shop not far from
Toadcaster Pier. She was a sea witch and never liked to be too far from the water. Mrs. Rack's mother, Mrs. Rack, had been a mermaid, proper one who lived on a rock and combed her hair and sang. But sailors had never been lured to their doom by her, partly because she looked like the back of a bus, and partly because modern ships are so high out of the water that they never even saw her. So one day, she had simply waddled out onto the beach at Toadcaster Head with some souvenirs from a sunken galleon and persuaded a plastic surgeon who was on holiday there to operate on her tail and turn it into 2 legs. It was from her mother that Mabel Rack had her magic powers. From her father, Mr. Rack, she had the shop. Today, she closed the shutters early, put a couple of Todd's heads into a paper bag, and set off for her seaside bungalow. She was just turning into her road when she saw a group of children paddling happily in the surf. "Yet!" said Mrs. Rack, pursing her lips. She closed her eyes, waved her paper bag with the cod's head, and said some poetry. Almost at once, the shoal of screaming jellyfish appeared in the water, and the children ran screaming to their mothers. "That's better," said Mrs. Rack. Like most witches, she feared happiness. When she got home, she went straight into her bed. Okay.
Bedroom to change. Heavens are like parties. What you wear is important. For this one, Miss Rack slipped into a purple robe embroidered all over in yellow cross-stitch haddocks, and fastened her best brooch, a single sea slug mounted in plastic, onto the band, which kept her frizzy hair in place. Then she went into the bathroom. "Come on, dear," she said, bending over the bath. "Time to get ready." What lived in Miss Rack's bath was, of course, her familiar. Familiars are the animals that help witches with their magic and are exceedingly important. Miss Rack's familiar was an octopus, a large animal with pale tentacles, suckers which left rings of blood where they had been. and vile red eyes. It was a girl octopus, and its name was Doris. "Now don't keep me waiting, dear," said Miss Rat. She had fetched a polythene bucket from the bathroom cupboard and was trying to stuff Doris inside. "Tonight's going to be an important night." But Doris was in a playful mood. As soon as one tentacle was in, another was out, and it was a rather bedraggled Miss Rack who at last fixed on the lid, loaded the bucket onto an old perambulator, and set off for the Coven bus. Ethel Feedbag's familiar was not an octopus. It was a pig. Ethel was a country witch who lived in a tumble-down cottage
in a village to the west of Toadcaster. She was a round-faced, rather simple person who liked to hack at rutabagas with her spade, make parsnip wine, and shoveled manure over absolutely everything. And just as people often grow to look like their dogs, or the other way around, Ethel had grown to look very much like her pig. Both of them had round, peaked cheeks and very large behinds. Most of them moved slowly on short, hairy legs and green tails as they went along, and both of them had gun-colored, sleepy little eyes. Ethel had a job at the egg packing station. It was a boring job because the eggs were she packed were mostly
rotten anyway, so there was nothing for her to do, but she filled in by giving the sheep husk and turning the cows dry as she bicycled home of an evening. As for the plants in the hedgerow between the egg packing station and Ethel's cottage, there was scarcely one that wasn't covered in mold or rust or hadn't clusters of greedy aphids, I don't know if I said that, sucking at its juices. But tonight, she rode straight home. Ethel was not a snappy dresser, but to make herself smart for the Coven, she rubbed down her Wellington boots with a handful of straw and changed her pinafore for a clean one with a felt tomatoes showing felt tomato blight stitched to the pocket. Then she started looking for something she could take to eat. There didn't seem to be anything in the kitchen, but on the hearth rug in the living room she found a dead jack-claw, which had fallen down the chimney. "That'll roast a treat," said Ethel, scooping it up. Then she went down to the shed at the bottom of the garden to fetch her pig. Nancy and Nora Schauder were twin witches who worked at Toadcaster Central Station. They were an unusually disagreeable pair who hated passengers, hated each other, and hated trains. As soon as Nancy went to the loudspeaker and announced that the 7:52 to Edinburgh was approaching platform 9, Nora rushed to her loudspeaker and cackled into it that the
7:52 had engine trouble and would be 90 minutes late, and then it wouldn't approach platform 9 at all, but would come in at platform 5 if they were lucky. So now, when they should have been getting ready for the Coven, they were standing in their underclothes in the bedroom of their flat in Station Road, arguing about which of their familiars was which. "This is so my chicken," shouted Nora, tugging at the tail feathers of the unfortunate bird. "That is not your chicken," shrieked Nora. "That is your chicken with hair." It was a most ridiculous argument. The Shouter girls were identical, with dyed red hair, long noses, and smoke-stained fingertips. They dressed alike and slept in twin beds, and they both had chickens for familiars, which lived in wicker crates beneath their beds. And, of course, the chickens, too, were very much alike. Chickens often are fidgety brown birds who would peck your fingers as soon as look at you. But none of this made any difference to the Shouter twins, who went on bickering so long that they were very nearly late for the most important Coven of their lives. For many years now, the Witches of Toadcaster had met on Windy Low Heath, a wild, weathering sort of place with a few stunted thorn trees, a pound in which, or pond in which a... Go.
Gloomy lady had drowned herself on her wedding eve, and a single large rock on which the ancient druids had done some dreadful deeds. To get there, the witches hired a bus, the Coven Special, which left the bus depot at 7 p.m. No one had flown on a broomstick since a witch called Mrs. Hawkeridge had been sucked down the ventilation shaft of a Boeing 707 from Heathrow to Istanbul and nearly caused a very nasty mess indeed. The Shouter twins were still quarreling when they got to the depot, but they stopped when they saw, standing on the pavement beside the bus, a small brown coffee table. "It's her again," said Nancy. "Oh, silly old crone," said Nora. "I've a good mind to stub out my cigarette on her," said Nancy, who as usual had one dangling from her lips. They glared at the squat round table, which seemed to be swaying a little from side to side. "'Tis a pity when they go simple like that," said Ethel Feedbag. She had loaded her pig onto the trailer and now came over and prodded the table leg with her Wellington boot. The coffee table was, in fact, a very old witch called Mother Bloodwort, who lived in a tumble-down shack near a disused quarry in the poorest part of town. When she was young, Mother Bloodwort had been a formidable witch
of the old school, bringing people out in boils, putting the evil eye on butchers who sold her bristly chops, and casting spells on babies and perambulators so that their own mothers didn't know them. But now she was old. Her memory had gone, and like many old people, she got fancies. One of her fancies was to turn herself into a coffee table. There was no point in her being a coffee table. Mother Bloodwort did not drink coffee, which was far too expensive. And since she lived alone, there was no one who might have wanted to put a cup and saucer down on her. But she was a cranky old witch, and every so often she remembered the spell that changed her from a white-haired, whiskery old woman into a low oak table with carved legs and a glass top, and then there was no stopping her. What she did not often remember was how to turn herself back again. "Oh, come along," called Mabel Rack from inside the bus. "Leave the silly old thing where she is." From her mermaid mother, Mabel had inherited rather scaly legs that dried out easily and itched. So she wanted to get to Windy Low Heath, where the air was damp and cool. But just then, something happened. Two sparrows who'd been squabbling in the gutter lifted their heads and began to sing like nightingales. A flock of golden butterflies appeared from nowhere and dripped.
Okay.
Through the grimy bus station came the scent of the primroses with morning dew on them. "Ugh, it's her," said Nancy Shouter. "I'm off." And she threw her chicken into the trailer and climbed into the bus. "Me too," said the twin. "I can't stand her. I don't know why they allow her in the coven. Really, I don't." Belladonna came slowly around the corner. She was a very young witch with thick golden hair in which a short-eared bat hung like a little wrinkled prune. There was usually something in Belladonna's hair: a fledgling blackbird parked there by its mother while she went to hunt for worms, a baby squirrel wanting somewhere safe to eat its hazelnut, or a butterfly who thought she was a lily or a rose. Belladonna's nose turned up at the end, making a ledge for tired ladybirds to rest on. She had a high, clear forehead and eyes as blue as periwinkles. But as she came up to the bus, she hesitated and looked troubled and sad, for she had learned to expect only unkindness from the other witches. Then she saw the coffee table and forgot her own troubles at once. "Oh, poor Mother Bloodwort. Have you forgotten the undoing spell again?" The table began to rock, and Belladonna put her arm around it. "Try to think," she said. "I'm sure you can remember. Was it a rhyming spell?"
The table rocked harder. It was. Well, I'm sure it'll come back in a minute. She leaned her cheek against the glass top, sending healing thoughts into the old witch's tired brain. It's coming back. I can feel it coming back. There was a swishing. Belladonna tumbled backward, and there, standing before her, was an old woman in a long mouse-bitten cloak and felt bedroom slippers with the sides cut out. "Thank you, my dear," croaked Mother Bloodwort. "You're a kind girl, even if you are." But she couldn't bring herself to say the dreadful word. No black witch can. She hobbled to the bus and began to heave herself abroad, or board, clutching to her chest a large square 10 showing a picture of King George the sixth coronation on the lid. The 10 should have gone in the trailer. There was a rule that all familiars traveled separately, but Mother Bloodworts never let it out of her sight. Inside it were hundreds of large white maggots, which, when you blew on them, turned into a cloud of flies. One fly is no good for magic, but a cloud of flies in your hair, your eyes, your nose, that makes a very good familiar indeed. Belladonna was the last to get into the bus. She alone, of all the witches, had no familiar. For white magic, you do not need one. It was another thing that made her feel so very much alone. Okay.
Chapter 3. Belladonna had always been light. Even as a tiny baby, she had used her witch's teeth only to bite the tops off milk bottles, so that the blue tits could get at the cream. And as she grew older, her lightness grew steadily worse. Flowers sprang up where she walked. Bursts of glorious music fell from the air. And when she smiled, old gentlemen remembered the Christmases they had had when they were children. As for her hair, from the age of 6 or so, when it had reached her waist, there had always been someone resting in Belladonna's golden hair. Belladonna herself longed for darkness. To smite and blast and wreck and wither seemed to her the most wonderful thing in the world. But though she could heal people and charm the flowers out of the ground and speak the language
of the animals, even the simplest bit of evil, like, say, turning a pale green cucumber into a greasy black pudding with bits of fat in it, was more than she could manage. Not that she didn't try. Every morning before she went to work, she was an assistant in a flower shop. Belladonna would stand by the open window and say, "Every day and in every way, I am getting blacker and blacker." But she wasn't. And the worst thing she had to bear was the scorn and spite of the other witches. Belladonna really dreaded coven days when she was ignored and despised and had to huddle by herself out of the warm circle of firelight and feasting with only the familiars for company. The only reason she went was that she hoped one day some of the blood might rub off on her. The bus had left Toadcaster now. There was one more witch to pick up on the bus. Then Hill witch, whom the others called Monolot, after a lady on a radio program who was always complaining. Monolot's real name was Gwendolyn Swamp, and she played the harp in the Toadcaster Palm Orchestra. Miss Swamp came from a family of banshees who are the kind of witch who wails and sighs about the place and tells people when something awful is going to happen. Banshees
had never been a healthy bunch, and Monalot was so often ill that to get her to the coven at all was usually stopped the bus, especially by her house. "She's not at the gate," said Mabel Brack impatiently. The air conditioning in the coven special was making her legs itch unbearably. So Belladonna, who always took the messages and ran the errands for the others, climbed out of the bus and walked through the garden of Monolot's little villa with the name Creepy Corner written on the gate. The door was open. Belladonna ran up to the bedroom, knocked on the door, and saw at once that Monolot would not be coming to the coven. The poor witch was completely covered in small red spots. "It's the measles," she moaned, "all over me. Percy, too. She waved a limp hand to the corner of the room where her familiar, a large, sad-looking sheep, was lying. A sheep with measles is unusual, but where there is witchcraft, anything is possible. Belladonna was very upset. Couldn't I help? She began, but like most witches, Mona Lot hated the word help. No, she moaned. Just go and leave me. No one wants me anyway. Nobody cares. So Belladonna poured her a drink, lumped up her pillows, and went out, passing on Monolot's
dressing table, wax images of her doctor and the district nurse, both stuck full of pens. I'm afraid it's hopeless, she reported, back in the bus. Mrs. Swamp has the Oh, I'm afraid it's hopeless, she reported, back in the bus. Mrs. Swamp has the measles. Stupid old banshee, snapped Nora Shouter. They were always delicate, the Swamps, said Mother Bloodwort. She had opened her tin with the coronation on the lid and was stirring her maggots with a long and bony finger. She was still stirring and muttering when the bus got to Windy Low Heath. 2 hours later, the coven was in full swing. In the middle of the heat, a bonfire roared and crackled, lighting up the great rock on which the ancient Druids had sown their dreadful weeds. The smell of burnt feathers from pebbled feed bags toasted jackdaw rose hideously on the night air. Clouds passed to and fro across the fitful moon. The witches finished feasting, thinking through thoughts, the kind where owls isn't just trying to howl, but with themes like ballad or fowl, and dancing back to back. Or trying to. Ethel Feedbags Wellington, who did not help, tried to side of her behind as she was perched round with Mabel Rat. You're going the wrong way, you stupid dick, yelled Nancy over her shoulder to her twin. It's winter, what is it? Winter shins. We should be going.
This is winter shins, you half-witted cowpatch! Nora screamed back. Mother Bloodwort did not dance anymore. She sat as close to the fire as she could get, her mouse-bitten robe turned back so that the heat could get at her gnarled, old legs. Every so often, a handful of the flies that buzzed drunkenly round her head fell into the flames and vanished. As for Belladonna, as usual, she was left out in the cold. No one wanted to dance with her. Anyway, like mothers who hand their children over to nannies and nursemaids, the witches had told Belladonna to take their familiars away to a little clump of thorn trees and keep them quiet. This was easier said than done. As soon as the familiars saw Belladonna, they always went to pieces. Ethel Feedbag's enormous pig had collapsed like a felled tree and was lying on its back, its legs in the air, squealing for her to scratch its stomach. The Shouter chickens, who hadn't laid anything in years, began to puff out their feathers and trying to please her with an egg. And Doris, the octopus, stuck a tentacle out of her plastic bucket and laid it softly on Belladonna's knee. Meanwhile, over by the fire, the witches grew wilder and wilder. Mother Bloodwort was knocking back a bottle of black liquid labeled furniture polish, not for human consumption. Mabel Rack was kicking her scaly legs higher.
Pulling off her garters of the Shouter twins were hacking at each other's sins, and then suddenly something happened. From there came from the very depths of the earth a low and sinister thunder. And the ground began to shake, shiver, and a dreadful crack appeared. An earthquake yelled Mabel Wreck, and the witches threw themselves on the ground, shivering with fear. Next came a thunderclap, louder than they had ever heard, followed by a streak of forked lightning, so brilliant that it turned like day. Then before the lightning, and to beat the white old head against the ground. After that came the fog, a great yellow, silken, blinding fog which rolled across the heath, enveloping everything in its cold and smothering. It is the end of the world, wailed Ethel Feedbag. Creeping death, shrieked the chorus shouter. Only Belladonna was still on her feet, trying to comfort the terrified familiars. Then as suddenly as it had come, the great fog rolled away. There was a last clap of thunder.
Oh.
Who that called my name?
Okay.
For there, standing astride the great rock of the Druids, was a figure so splendid, so magnificent, that it quite took their breath away. Ah. Ariman had taken a lot of trouble with his clothes. He wore a flowing mantle embroidered with the constellation of the planets. His trousers were of gold lame, and he wore not just horns, but antlers, which Lester had fastened most cunningly behind his ears. With his devilish eyebrows, his soaring mustache, and the sulphurous glow that surrounded him, he presented a vision from which one simply could not tear one's eyes. Greetings, ye foul-mouthed hags and lovers of darkness, boomed the great magician. Greetings, croaked the witches, rising slowly to their feet. Ariman could not see Belladonna, who was hidden behind a thorn tree, but he could see Mabelrack, whose sea slug had fallen over one eye, and Ethel Feedbag, a burnt jack-claw feather sticking to her chin. He could see Mother Bloodwort, and he could see the Shouter twins. And when he'd seen them, he turned and tried to scramble down the rock. Steady, sir, said Mr. Leadbetter, who was standing behind the rock with a sheaf of papers. The cankers have never been quitters, sir, said Lester, placing a huge hand on his master's shoulder.
Seeing his retreat cut off, Ariman reluctantly climbed up the rock again. The witches, meanwhile, were getting dreadfully excited. They had begun to realize that they were in the presence of the great wizard of the north, whom nobody had seen for years and years and years, and whose power was the greatest in the land. Know ye, Ariman went on bravely, that I am Ariman the Awful, loather of the light and blighter of the beautiful. No, we know, croaked the witches. Know ye also that, obedient to the prophecy of the gypsy Esmeralda, I have waited 990 days for the coming of the new wizard to Darkington Hall. He caught a whiff of manure from Ethel Feedbag's Wellington and staggered backwards. Oh, come on, be sir, came Lester's voice from the darkness behind him, and with a great effort, Ariman pulled himself together and went on. Know ye also that the aforesaid wizard, not having turned up, I, Ariman Frederick Canker, have decided to take a wife. The excitement of the witches grew to a fancy. They began to mutter and nudge each other and to cackle fiendishly because it was known that Ariman had sworn never to marry. Only Belladonna went on standing quietly in the shelter of the trees, her periwinkle eyes fixed wonderingly on the great magician. Okay.
Know ye, Ariman went on, bracing himself, that for my bride, I have decided to choose a Witch of Toadcaster, and that whichever witch I choose shall reign. His voice broke. I can't do it, he murmured, passing a hand across his eyes. He had just caught sight of Mother Bloodwort's fly-stained whiskers in a sudden spurt of firelight. No use turning back now, sir, said Mr. Ledbetter's quiet voice. But both the secretary and the ogre, peering out from behind the rock, were very much upset. They had had no idea that things had gotten so bad in Toadcaster. So Ariman made a last desperate effort. Know ye, he went on, that to choose which shall be my bride, I have arranged a great competition in the grounds of my estate at Darkington during the fearful week of Halloween. And know ye that whichever witch does there the vilest, darkest, and most powerful piece of magic shall be my wife. Pandemonium now broke out. Ariman waited for the lurching, cackling, and hiccuping to die down, and then he said, Mr. Ledbetter, my secretary, will stay behind to give you your instructions for the contest. And remember, he said, throwing out his arms, that what I am looking for is power, wickedness, and evil. Darkness is all. With a sigh of relief, Ariman vanished.
Okay.
When the witches had calmed down again, Mr. Ledbetter stepped out from behind the rock and handed everyone an entry form for the contest. Mother Bloodwort, who couldn't read, held hers upside down, and the Shouter twins immediately began arguing about how many days there were to Halloween. What about that lady over there? Asked Mr. Ledbetter. He had caught sight of the pale glimmer of Belladonna's hair between the trees. Oh, you don't want to bother with her, said Nancy Shouter. She is not one of us, said her twin. Still, she is a witch, said Mother Bloodwort, spitting out a couple of flies. She was the only one who sometimes had a kind word for Belladonna. So Mr. Ledbetter walked over to the clump of trees where Belladonna was still trying to calm the familiars. Oh dear, he said, when he had introduced himself. How very unfortunate. For he realized as soon as he saw her what was wrong. The little short-eared bat hanging so tenderly in her hair, the chickens roosting on her feet, the scent of primroses with morning dew on them. Have you, always been white? Said Belladonna sadly. Yes, from birth. Nothing can be done, I suppose.
Belladonna shook her head. I've tried everything. You won't be going in for the contest then? Belladonna shook her head. What would be the use? You heard him. Darkness and all, he said. Witches cannot cry any more than wizards can, but her eyes were wide with sorrow. Tell me, is he really as marvelous as he looks? Mr. Ledbetter thought. Pictures came into his mind. Ariman shrieking with rage when he lost his suspenders. Ariman filling the bath with electric eels and giggling. Ariman ordering 12 stinking emus for the zoo and leaving his secretary to unpack them. But there was nothing mean or small-spirited about Ariman, and it was very sincerely that Mr. Ledbetter said, he is a gentleman, most truly a gentleman. Oh, I thought he must be, said Belladonna, sighing. Well, I'll leave you one of these anyway, in case you change your mind, he said, and perhaps you'd be kind enough to see that Miss Swamp, gets hers too. He had turned away when he remembered something. I'm going to vanish in a minute, he said. At least I hope I am. I don't have any magic powers myself, so I hope the great man will remember. But when I do, there'll be some presents on the rock, one for each witch. Make sure you get yours. Oh, thank you. I will, said Belladonna. Then she added shyly, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but...
When you walked away, just now, I thought how very good-looking it was. Your tail, I mean. Mostly the backs of gentlemen are so flat and dull. Mr. Ledbetter was very moved. Well, thank you, my dear. You've made me very happy. Of course, the moonlight is flattering. By daylight, it can look a little crude. He pressed her hand gratefully. It was on the tip of his tongue to tell her about his childhood and the shock of finding that he was not like other boys. But just then, Ariman found he needed his secretary. There was a little puff of smoke. I said there was a little puff of smoke, and Mr. Ledbetter vanished. Almost, almost at once. The other bitches began to shriek and yammer. Look over there on the rock. Something glittering. The next second, they were all scrambling at a pile of oval hand mirrors, very beautiful ones, set in frames of precious stones. But when they looked into the mirrors' shining surfaces, they did not see their own ugly faces. They saw the faces of the great Ariman, with his flashing eyes and curving nose and magnificent mustache. What was more, the mirror showed the witches what Ariman was doing at any moment in time so that they could get to know him and his habits and know what awaited them at Darkington if they should win. Okay?
What a smasher! Said Nora Shouter. Well, you're not going to win. Going to win. Cool. I don't mind being married to him, said Ethel Feedbag. You'll give the sheep the staggers, I will, when I get up there, and the cows the bloat.
Mabel Rack smiled pityingly. The daughter of Mrs. Rack, who'd been a mermaid, was such an obvious winner that she had nothing at all to worry about.
Oh, Mabel Canker, wizardess of the North.
Sounded good.
I never thought I'd be glad I buried poor Mr. Bloodwort,
said Mother Bloodwort.
Competition! You!
Shrieked the Shouter twins.
I am not,
said Mother Bloodwort.
No, there's a little man his legs in all the way. But I've got to tell you, so yeah, spell. It's on the tip of my tongue, and when I remember it, I won't have make things wrong.
Belladonna had crept shyly forward and picked up one of the two mirrors that still glittered on the rock. Ariman was taking off his antlers. She could just see Lester's huge hand undoing the tape. The great man looked tired and discouraged. Oh, if only she could be there to stroke his forehead and comfort him.
What are you hanging around for?
Said Mabel Rack.
Okay.
You won't
be going in for the competition. That'd be a joke. Blossoming roses in the snow, golden singing birds. Yuck, said Nora Shouter. Belladonna said nothing. In silence, she helped the other witches pack up their picnics, lifted Doris onto the trailer, soothed Ethel Feedbag's pig, but when the bus was ready to leave, she did not join the others. It was a long walk back to Toadcaster in the darkness, but she welcomed the idea of it. More than anything, she wanted to be alone. She was sitting quietly on the rock where she had stood, gazing into the mirror when a high and irritable voice said, "Well, I think you're just being wet and feeble." Belladonna sat up, startled. Then she realized that the voice had spoken not human, but bat, and had come from her own hair. Not to say spineless, the little wet bat went on. Why don't you at least have a try? Don't be silly, said Belladonna. You know perfectly well that I can't even make a toad come out of someone's mouth, and that's the corniest piece of blackness there is. People change, said the bat. Take my Aunt Screwtooth. She was the most useless old bat you can imagine. Couldn't suck juice out of an overripe pear without her husband to hold her claw. Then they took
a holiday in some place abroad, Transylvania or some such name. She fell in with a family of vampires and settled over there. You should see her now, sucking blood as if it were mother's milk. Fairly snozzled with the stuff she is. And if my Aunt Screwtooth, why not you? Belladonna was bending over the mirror again. Ariman was in his pajamas now. Yellow silk, They were edged with black braid. Is that really true about your Aunt Screwtooth? The little bat blushed in the darkness. He had made the whole thing up because he loved Belladonna. But Belladonna did not see. She was thinking if she went in for the contest, she could at least see him again. He'd be one of the judges for sure. And once she was there, maybe she'd find some way to help and comfort him. She stood up. All right, she said. I'll do it. I'll have a try.
Alrighty, we're gonna stop right here because it is 9:53. So yes,
Yay.
we actually didn't get as far as I thought we would. So, but I mean, hey, we read for an
You played
hour.
for it. That was good.
Yep. So,
All right,
This reminds me of like an ancestor of Gomez Adams. You know, almost like the
Yeah.
Adams family. So I'm thoroughly
it really
enjoying it.
does.